There is no hard and fast definition of secondary color correction, but in general what it means is adjusting tonality or color in a region within a clip. That region might be an object, a person's face, the sky, a tree, a rock, something inside the clip as opposed to the entire clip. Now the crux of secondary color correction is how do you go about selecting those areas, those regions, those objects? And there are all kinds of ways to do that inside Premiere Pro. In this chapter, I'm going to explain in detail how to do several different methods of secondary color correction. In this video, I want to give you a preview of all those various methods so you can get a good sense of how secondary color correction works. So to check out those various methods, go to Working Files, go to Premiere Pro Projects, and open up Secondary Concepts. The most frequently used way to select an object or a region within a clip is to use the Track Matte key. Not only can you select an object or an area, you can also exclude an object or an area using a Track Matte key. So when I introduce Track Matte keys, I'm going to talk about how you select objects or areas. For example, this headstone here is kind of dark against the lighter area. What I'd like to do is make it brighter and make the rest of this area darker. So I need to somehow select that guy so I can work only on it. And the way you do that is with the Track Matte key that's connected to a graphic. You can make the graphic in Premiere Pro using a titler. So I go over here. I created this little graphic inside the titler using the pen tool. It's fairly easy to do that. Close that down. And then I connect that graphic to this clip here, which is exactly the same as the one below it. I connect that graphic using the Track Matte key effect right there. So let me show you how this works. Right now I've got this layer turned off. I'll turn it on. And I'll turn on the Luma curves here. You see that I make it a little bit brighter. Then I can go down to this clip below here, which is in fact what you're seeing all around this clip except for the headstone. And I can make that darker like that. So we can isolate this thing within that whole clip. Same is true for this clip over here to the right. This rock is kind of bright. I'd rather make it darker so it doesn't pull people's interest down here instead of out here. So again, I create a little graphic. Looks like the rock using the pen tool again. I connect that graphic to this clip using the Track Matte key. I'll turn that on again so you can see it. I make it darker using the Luma curve like that. And then I can take this clip down here and I can change its color a bit and have everything blend together like that. Another use for the Track Matte key is when you have something moving in the scene. So for example, we have this shot with this window and the window's too bright and I want to darken it a bit. But the thing is, the camera zooms in. What do you do about that? So you create a Track Matte key and then animate the graphic. So I'll show you one instance of that. Here's this clip on top. And I connected that to this graphic here. That is our matte that we use for the Track Matte key. And then I put that matte in motion so that it follows the motion that the camera creates. That dark area stays there, and you do that for all four windows. Another secondary color concept is vignette. A vignette is kind of a soft border, a little oval border around things. Right now there is no oval border here, but you can create that using a Track Matte key again. Here's a little oval we created, very simple to make that, and these areas here will be made darker. Close that down. We connect it to this clip on top, which is the same as the clip below it. Once I turn on this layer, see the vignette show up. Now when I turned it on, you went, oh, that's pretty obvious, right? But it's not necessarily obvious if it's on to begin with. If I go to this next clip, you may not notice that the vignette is there. If I turn it off, then you go, I see that vignette now. But if it's there and you don't really notice it because people are drawn to the center of the clip. You can also use something like a vignette to create a blurred background. Take a look at this. Here we have this basic scene, but I'd like to blur this background a little bit more. So I can create another Track Matte, another matte that we can use as a Track Matte like that. And I can connect it to this clip here, turn that on. You don't see anything happen yet. The clip below here, I'm going to blur. Turn on the blur for that. That lets us then make the background blur while we keep her in focus. There are other ways to create a vignette. You can use the so-called circle effect. This is the circle effect being applied to a black matte or a black clip above this person. I turn that off for a second. You see how that looked originally. But there's the circle effect applied there. Another way to make a vignette. Sometimes you want to change the color of an object in the scene. There are several ways to do that. Look at this. There are three ways that I'm going to discuss. Change the color, paint bucket, and RGB curves. For example, change the color. I can do that. Take the bowl and turn it green or any other color. Paint bucket doesn't work quite so well with this blue bowl. It works pretty well with something that's very distinct, like a chroma key green, but nevertheless, we turned it sort of green there. And finally, RGB curves. It's another way to change colors, like so. Going over here, I have all this yellow that I want to turn to some other color, but I don't want to have this thing turn to a different color, and I don't want this to turn to a different color. So again, I use the Track Matte key, like so, to just isolate that little region there. And then I can change the color using the same methods as before. I can turn on the change to color there, and limit it to that. Turn over the paint bucket, the three-way color corrector. Now all of those look pretty wild in terms of the color. You probably wouldn't want to end up using them like that. But since this is on a layer above another layer, you can change the opacity, like so. And you can change the blending mode, like so, for example. You can do kind of the reverse. You can take an object here and retain its color, but make everything else grayscale, desaturate everything. And to do that, I use the leave color effect. If I turn that on, you make the blue bowl stick around, but everything else turn gray. Over here, I have these women sitting on the bench, and I selected that shirt and kept that color. Now, the shirt was not that bright to begin with. I made the color more intense using the fast color corrector, and then I selected it. And the lipstick here, and on her, kind of shone through. So I excluded the areas of the lipstick by creating another track matte key, using this particular graphic to exclude their faces, but still keep the shirt in the picture. I also want to talk about using the tint effect. You can create a sepia tone like this, and by the way, if you do that, the sepia tone will look kind of dull, but then you can ramp up the contrast by applying the Luma curve to that. And also you can put a tint on a color clip like this, and if you put it on an adjustment layer above the clip, you have more latitude. You can change the opacity of it like so. Also change the blending mode if you like. Going down the line here, there's a thing called tonal range definition, where you can say exactly what should be a highlight or what should be a shadow or what should be a midtone. And once you do that, then you have more control over how you control the color in your clip. So for example, this building, I wanted to make sure that area was considered to be a highlight and nothing else in there, no midtones, just highlights. So I use tonal range definition here inside the three-way color corrector or inside the RGB color corrector. I changed the definition from the default definition of what constitutes a highlight to my definition of what constitutes a highlight. And that gives me more latitude over how I control the color. And I also use the track matte key here to help isolate the area. But for example, let me turn this one on for a second. Clicking on the three-way color corrector. Then you can see how we can control just that area because we define that area as a highlight. We work only with the highlight wheel to make the changes there. I can do the same thing over here. In this case, I can convert the sky from midtones and highlights to only highlights, so I can work with highlights exclusively there. Or I can do the opposite. I can take these midtones and blacks here and turn them into just blacks, which is what I did here. I'll click on U, open up the three-way color corrector, and here I just worked with this whole area. I converted it to just blacks here. I can work with that separately from everything else. Finally, there are a couple of effects that have secondary color correction controls within them. Going down there to click on this one. We'll take a look at this first clip here. This building really is not that pale looking. It's actually kind of orange looking. And so you can use the three-way color corrector's secondary color controls, which are down here, to define areas that you want to fix, like that. And once you define them, then you can change their color, which we did up here with this particular controller there. Over here, we can select the ocean, for example. Open this up. I'm going down here and show you the secondary color controls there. Show the mask that we create for this one by turning it on. We decide that we're going to fix that area only. Turn that mask off. And we change the colors for that area by making the ocean look a little bit bluer there. So there are all sorts of ways to select regions within a clip and then apply color or tonality changes to those objects. I'm going to explain how to use the tonality and color controls in SpeedGrade. And notice that I said controls, not color wheels. That's because we're going to work with color wheels and another set of controls called sliders. SpeedGrade has a full set of tonality and color controls that exceed those that you can find inside Premiere Pro. To see how this works, we're going to work with Premiere Pro and SpeedGrade. So start off by opening up Premiere Pro by going to Working Files, go to Premiere Pro Projects, and open up SG Controls. We're going to work with these two clips here, this linear gradient and this 4-color gradient. But we're going to start off by opening up SpeedGrade. So minimize this and open up SpeedGrade directly. And I want you to open up the SG Controls Premiere Pro project, which is here in my recent project list, but it might not be in yours. So click on Open Project, go to Premiere Pro Projects and going down to SG Controls and open that up. Click on Open here. I want you to have the waveform scope available here. So right click on this and click on Waveform if you don't see that. And this waveform scope is a straight line. That's because we have this gradient that goes from black to white, left to right. That's why you get that straight line there. I have the tonality and color controls wide open here. I did that by clicking this little disclosure triangle there. That would open up this panel with the snapshots and the masks. You can close it by clicking on that or pressing the W key. That opens or closes it, like so. We're going to work with these color wheels But we're also going to work with sliders, and we access the sliders by clicking this button right there. Everything's kind of grayed out like it's not accessible, but it lights up when you hover over it like that. All right, we'll go back to the color wheels by clicking on that. I want to start off by working with tonality, the brightness, and the tonality controls are on the outer edge of these color wheels, those little gray and white curves there. Every color wheel has one, and there are 12 color wheels here inside SpeedGrade. There are 3 for the overall look, 3 for shadows, 3 for midtones, and 3 for highlights. 12 color wheels. It may seem like overkill, but it gives you lots of control. Let's go back to overall here. This first color wheel is called offset. Let me pull it down a bit so you can see it. Offset is the same as the pedestal inside the RGB color corrector inside Premiere Pro. And the way pedestal and offset work is that they lift up or drop overall luminance entirely for the clip as one big unit. I'm going to take this little triangle here and drag it left or right. Not up or down and not around the curve, just drag it right or left. So I'm going to drag it right first, and it lifts everything up equally. Drag it left, it drops everything equally. Now the slope of that little line changes, not because something strange is going on, that's just where the scale works. In fact, we're lifting everything equally here. Making it all brighter, making it all darker like that. If I make a change like this and I want to get back to the beginning, I click this little triangle there to reset it like that. That puts it back to neutral. If I go away, then I turn off the light there. If I go back here and turn it some direction, it stays on to tell you that you've made a change. So I'll click this and reset it. The normal workflow is to just offset first to take care of the blacks, and then you fix the highlights. You do that with gain. Gain works similarly, but it just locks down the blacks end and works from this end up as if this were a fulcrum and this thing was a big lever. So I'll take this and drag it to the left. That pulls it down, and notice that the blacks don't move at all. Lift it up, and we lift up the end like that. So it works as a straight line like this. It does not affect the blacks, or it only affects them gradually as they move up that line like that. And then if you want to adjust the gamma, which would normally be the midtones, you'd use this, but it's not truly midtones here. It affects only this end of the midtones. Notice how the curve bends pretty much toward the middle of the shadows down here. So it's not truly midtones. It's the midtones of the shadows. Let me reset those two guys. So why have the shadows, midtones, and highlights sections? Well, this gives you a lot more control. I'll click on shadows. I'll move this up a bit. You'll notice one more thing showed up here, this little line there. That's a pivot point for where you decide the shadows begin and end. I'll show you that in a second. If we go to offset, which normally lifts everything equally, it doesn't work like that here. It works kind of like the way gain works. There's going to be a fulcrum right here, and we're going to lift up this lever like this. So go like this, and there is that fulcrum in the middle. We're just cutting it right off. So we adjust the shadows only in that area there from basically 50% on down. If I go to the gain, it's going to work on this end here, but not any higher than that point. So it bulges it up right there. And if I work on the gamma, it works on the lower end there, lower to middle, like so. Kind of like the gamma and overall. But notice that does not affect anything above that point. I'll reset these guys so things look more obvious here. I'll take this and move it up like that, make it really obvious. I can move this point so I can define exactly where the shadows lie, rather than taking the default here. And I do that using this little pivot over here. Drag this up or down. You barely see a change there. Hold on the shift key, that makes it go faster. So I can adjust that boundary, that border between the shadows and everything else, basically. And it works similarly for highlights. I'll reset this. I'll reset this. If I go to highlights, you see that the little controller's on the left-hand side because it's going between the midtones and the highlights. It says MH. So you define the boundary between midtones and highlights. I'll go over here and show you that. I'll just pull this thing like so, and notice that it basically bends it in the middle again. We can lift this thing up or down, define where that break's going to be. I'll reset that. Reset this. And then the midtones have two controllers because you define the width of the midtones. If I move you like so, I can then take the width and change it. So I'll drag this down. I'll drag this up. Now we define the midtones as that little range right there. So it's nice to have this extra control. Can you do this inside Premiere Pro? Well, sort of. Let's go back to Premiere Pro. I'm going to take a look at that linear gradient. Open it up and look at the RGB curves on it. And there's the master controller. If I move this, that's like using the gain inside SpeedGrade. And if I move it down here like this, that's kind of like using the gamma, but it affects the rest of the clip too. So I need to pull it down a little bit just to affect that end of the gamma. But if I want to do the same as offset, I need to lift this up and this up. That's how offset works. Or pull them both down. So we can do what's being done inside SpeedGrade using the RGB curves, but we have less precision because putting the point in the middle becomes a little tricky. I'll show you that. If we want to affect only, let's say, the shadows starting from there on down, we need to put in several points. Just the shadows that way down there. It's a little trickier here inside Premiere Pro. All right, I'm going to reset RGB curves. Let's take a look at the gradient here. I want to look at the color controls here and how they affect Luma. I'm going to open up the fast color corrector first here. If I start moving the colors around, notice that Luma barely changes there inside the waveform scope. You're seeing a change in contrast a bit as we add more color. But other than that, we're not really affecting the Luma all that much here. That's how the color wheel works here inside Premiere Pro, which is distinctly different than the color wheel inside SpeedGrade. I'm going to reset this and turn that off. Let's take a look at RGB curves on the other hand. If you move, let's say, just the red here, it affects the Luma a lot. So RGB curves not only changes color, but also Luma. You can see that a lot better if you change over to the RGB Parade here. So go to this little panel menu, go to RGB Parade. Let's change red here, lift it up. Notice that red goes up, but green and blue don't change. When you work with RGB curves, you're affecting only the color channel you're working with. You can obviously work with all three color channels, but in this case, we're working with only red, and that affects only the red here. It does not change green or blue. If I go back to the fast color corrector here, turn that on. When I work with a color here, it affects everything. I drag toward red, it drops green and blue. Drag toward blue, drops red and green, like that. So the fast color corrector, or the color wheels in the three-way color corrector, affect all the colors at once. That's very much how the SpeedGrade color wheels work as well, but SpeedGrade also affects Luma. To see how that works, let's go back to SpeedGrade. I'm going to go take a look at this clip over here. If I take a color control here and drag it toward red, for example, it goes very slowly. Hold down the Shift key, it goes much faster. And notice how we're changing Luma pretty dramatically here as we move around there. So this control is not like the color wheel inside Premiere Pro. It affects Luma and Chroma at the same time. To see that better, let's go to the RGB Parade, which is called Parade here. Right-click here, and go to Parade. We have that same kind of a view again, where we pull toward red, and blue and green will move down. Again, the scale kind of moves with us here. That's just the way it works here inside SpeedGrade. As we move around here, we're affecting all the colors at once. Now, a lot of people find this very intuitive, but if you want to change just one color channel, you can't do that with a color wheel. But all is not lost here. I'm going to reset this guy by clicking this little triangle there. I'm going to go over to the sliders by clicking on this. Let me pull the sliders up a bit so you can see them all. There's a little lock there at the bottom which links them all together. Turn that off. Now if I want to work with just the red channel, I can slide this right or left. Hold on the Shift key to make it go faster. There I'm working with red. It looks like green and blue are changing, but they're not. That's just the scale of the scope adjusting there. So you can work with individual color channels here inside SpeedGrade as well. You don't have to work only with the color wheels, which affect all the colors at once. So SpeedGrade offers a full suite of tonality and color correction tools. Taken together, they offer more control than all of the effects do inside Premiere Pro. The only little caveat is that when you make any changes to any of the colors here, you're also changing Luma. And so when you're done working with color, you always need to go back and take a look at your Luma, take a look at the waveform scope to see if you need to adjust the Luma as you wrap up your project. Masks in SpeedGrade work a lot like the track matte keying video effect inside Premiere Pro. You use the track matte key effect to create a region within a clip in which you want to make a change or outside of which you want to make a change. So you might highlight a face, a sky, or a building, and then apply changes to it or outside of that object. Well, masks have the same basic functionality inside SpeedGrade, but in general they're easier to work with. You don't need a separate graphic and you don't have to work on a separate layer. So to see how masks work inside SpeedGrade, start up SpeedGrade, click on Open Project, go to Working Files, Premiere Pro Projects, and open up SG Masks. Click on Open. We're going to apply masks to two different still images. There's image number 1 and image number 2, but this one's going to have a bug associated with it, so I'm going to show you the workaround for that bug when I show you this particular version of it. And then we've got 3 video clips that we're going to apply masks to. So let's go back to this first one here. I'm going to introduce you to masks by using a vignette. But to see how the vignette works, I want to change this clip first. I've got the adjustment layer selected there, and I'm going to reduce the tonality, make it darker, bring it down like so. And we'll bring down the gain as well, the gain and the gamma. And the vignette then will protect this area. It'll keep it from getting dark and then make the outside edges dark. Now to apply a mask, we need to go to this panel here. And if you don't see the panel, click on this little guy there, that little triangle, and open it up like so, or press the W key and click on the mask button. Here are the mask controls. There are 3 presets. There's a circle, a square, and a vignette. And the vignette has this fall off where it goes from the edge of the mask then to where the mask is not being applied and go either direction. It works kind of like applying the blur to the track matte graphic when you're working inside Premiere Pro. But here you have much more control. So far nothing's happened because we haven't applied this mask to the clip. So I'm going to do that first. And I do that down here inside the layers stack. Now when you apply a mask to the layer, a little graphic will show up here inside this layer, but sometimes it's slow to apply. Unless you click on it, then it shows up right there. There's a little graphic saying you've applied a mask to this layer. But nothing's happened yet. You need to tell it what to do. Right now it's in neutral. This little line there in that blue box tells you that you've applied the mask, but you haven't told it whether you want to apply the tonality that you changed inside it or outside it. And you tell it that by using one of these two buttons here. That applies the tonality inside it, that applies it outside it. So we want the changes to go outside of the mask. So I'll click on that. There you go. Now we've got the inside protected and the outside with the changes applied to it. Now to see the vignette again, we need to click on the word mask here, and that turns it back on. So let's take a look at these controls here. This is called the widget, and there's a widget button down here. You can turn it on or off. I'm going to control this vignette with the widget. This little plus sign lets you move it around like that. The box in the middle lets you change the size of it overall. Up or to the right makes it larger. Left or down makes it smaller. The big horizontal arrow adjusts things left and right like so. And the big vertical arrow, it does what you'd expect. This little triangle twists things horizontally. This guy does it vertically. This little outside thing adjusts the size of the fall off. You can have fall off on the square, the circle, anything you want, just by using this little box here. If I move it to the right or up, makes it larger. Down or left makes it smaller. If you want to control individual points, you can. Make sure the selection tool is active down here and click on a point. You can move that around like so. You can change the fall off as well, like so. You can marquee select to select multiple points. I'll go up here and just drag a marquee selection around 4 points. You can probably barely see the marquee, but I've got these 4 points selected. I click on one of them and drag. It takes care of all 4. Or I can use the widget for this. I could go up, sideways, or all together. If I want to delete a point, it's kind of a process. I'll need to click away to deselect these guys. I'll select a point that I want to delete. So let's click on that one there. And then I go down here and click on this little button to delete it. I'll undo that by clicking this. Adding a point works differently. I click on this little button to add a point. That turns it on, makes a little blue thing there. That means that you can go around here and add points. Now, if you just add points randomly, it gets kind of weird because it tries to move points around to fill that gap. I'll undo that. It's best to work on the line. This guy will go away in a second when I click on a line. You see a little white dot there that sort of snaps to the line when you add a point. If you click and hold down your mouse, then you can move it around. If you take your mouse away and try to select it, you're just going to add another point. If you want to now go select the point, go back down here and click on the little selection tool. That way you can select the point like so. Sometimes it's hard to select the point and end up selecting the handles. These handles are Bezier handles. I like to change the shape of the curve like so. They work together like this. They're not called Bezier handles here inside SpeedGrade, but that's what they are. In SpeedGrade, these guys are called smooth splines. You can change the smooth spline into just a regular spline where the handles are broken, or into a corner point, and you do that with these controls down here. So you click a point like that, for example, which associates itself with its matching partner over there. If you click on this, it'll make it a corner point, both of those guys. So now if I click on this one, you'll see that it just kind of goes out at an angle like that. No handles. If I click on the second one here, that gives them handles. It gives you a little more control, but it's kind of hard to grab those handles sometimes, but there you go. If you can't grab a handle, you can always zoom in on the scene here by changing this thing from fit to something else like 75% or something. Then you can see the handles better. Notice the handles work independently here. And if you want to go back to the smooth spline, you just click on this guy, and now you're back to a Bezier curve where the handles work together. All right, let's move on down the line here. I'm going to go back to fit here and go to this next clip. This next clip will have a problem. I'm going to select the portrait side of things instead of the adjustment layer for now. Click on that. This portrait started its life as something significantly greater than an HD size. It's about 3,000 pixels tall. So I used the motion fixed effect inside Premiere Pro and brought it down to 1080 in height. So it matches the HD height here. And things will go south here when we apply a mask to it. So I'm going to drop down the tonality here, make it much darker so we can see this in action. Go back to the masks here, click on the vignette. I'm going to fix the vignette so it fits the image here. Then we'll apply it. Now I'm going to go down to this layer and apply it. Now there's a little indicator telling us that we've got a mask applied to this thing, but we haven't told it what to do yet. I'm going to say apply the grading to the outside of the mask. And look at that. It's just a tiny little thing in the middle. That's because the mask is being applied to the original 1920 by 1080 portion of this clip instead of the entire size of the clip. From the mask back on again, you can see that's the expected size of the mask, but the reality is that's the real application of the mask. So it doesn't work. And if I try to fix this by using an adjustment layer, it still won't work there either. Reset this, Go to the adjustment layer. I'll just show you what happens when I knock down the luminance here. Watch this. It will apply it only to the 1920 by 1080 segment of this clip, even though the adjustment layer has nothing to do directly with that clip. So that is a bug. You can overcome this by taking the mask and applying it to this guy and just making the mask much larger and seeing how it works. But when you go back to Premiere Pro, it will not work, so don't bother. The workaround to this is to use the transform effect. The transform effect is an effect you can apply to a clip and use it instead of motion so that you can adjust the positioning of it when it happens in the stacking order of effects inside Premiere Pro. So this next clip over here has the motion effect applied to it and then the lumetri effect applied below that, such that the motion is applied first and then lumetri is applied on top of that. And that's how you overcome this. So the same size, I shrunk it down to 40%, but now we're going to apply a mask to it. So I'm going to drop down the tonality again. And we'll apply vignette over here. We'll adjust the size, make sure we can see this thing in action. And we'll apply the grading to the outside of the mask by clicking on that, and now it works. And this will work back inside Premiere Pro as well. So the workaround for this bug is to use the transform effect, and then apply the lumetri effect kind of in neutral back inside Premiere Pro below the transform effect, and everything will work out for you. Let's move on down the line to this little clip here. I want to use the square mask here as sort of a starting point. But I'm going to apply it to the adjustment layer, which I think is kind of a better workflow. So let's click on the square mask here. There's our mask. I'm going to adjust the points here. These are all corner points. So I'll just drag them to the corners of this building here like that. And take you down there to the left like that. And you, I'm going to bring down below the branches. That's kind of a hard edge there, and I don't want that hard edge. So I want to add some points to it. So I go down here to this little plus guy there. Add some more points. Now these points will not be corner points when I add them. They will be Bezier curves. So I'll click another one and kind of pull it now at the same time. Click and pull back. Same thing up here. I'm going to just kind of click and pull down a little bit. Over here, click and pull in. Now, those will still be kind of hard-edged, and I need to adjust the handles to really finish this process, but that's pretty good. I'm going to put one more point right there and pull it out a bit. Now, my work might be easier if I applied some kind of a change to this as I did the work. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to change the color a bit. So we're going to make this thing oranger the way it's supposed to be. Dragging the slider to the right makes the entire scene orange. Then I go over here and I'm going to apply this thing inside the mask instead of outside the mask. So I click on this button instead. Now we're inside the mask, which looks pretty darn good. But even so, I probably don't want to change the trees there that much. I mean, we've got a hard edge to the trees. I want to kind of soften it with a little drop off, kind of like a vignette. So I'm going to use this guy to do that, but I don't want to apply it to everything. I want to apply it only to some selected points. So I move off to the side here. I get the selection tool. I marquee select those points there on the left. I go back here and turn on the widget. I'm going to take this and drag it to the right to expand the drop off there like so. So now we have a bit of a drop off there across the tree branch. So it's not quite so extreme, although it's pretty subtle anyways. But that is a great way to create a drop off like that just for a portion of your mask. Let's go down one more notch now. I want to talk about building a mask from scratch and show you that it's kind of cumbersome. And then we'll go to the alternative route here. So we've got this guy selected there. We're going to make a mask here. So I'm going to do it from scratch by clicking this little add points icon there. So I click to make a point, make another point here. And unlike the pen tool inside Premiere Pro in the titler, the next point actually creates a region as opposed to another line. Like over here, for example, you see we've now made a region, not a straight line. And that's a big difference here. It gets really kind of cumbersome building that way. I think it's better to start with a square or a circle. So I want to get rid of this mask by clicking on empty like that. I'm also going to help see the borders of my mask by bringing down the tonality a bit here, making it darker like so. Now we want to highlight just this area there. So I'm going to start off with a square, get my selection tool, bring the corner up to there, this corner over there, bring this corner down to here, like that. I think you get a sense of how this works. And now I'm going to add some points. So click on this little add point tool there. Click here and pull back. Click here and pull back. I can click and pull in a bit. Same routine as before. I don't want to get too carried away here. Just want to show you how this works. So you can make a mask like so. It's much easier to start with a square than to try to build it from scratch because you're creating a closed space rather than creating a straight line as you do inside Premiere Pro. All right, something like that. So let's see how this is working. I want to apply it to the outside. So we highlight the oranges or the lemons. There you go. See how that works? Click on mask again and we can see the edges of our mask. If we want to make some adjustments, we can, but so far, I think we're doing all right here. So that's how you draw a mask from scratch. I think you should start, generally speaking, with a square or a circle rather than trying to just click a bunch of points. Finally, let's go on down here a little bit. We're going to talk about vignetting again, but I'm going to apply the same vignette twice just to see how that works. Because the image is kind of bright, I want to darken around the edges like a vignette, but I also want to darken the inside as well. So we're going to have one mask that we can apply twice. So to see how we do that, let's first of all create the darkness that we want for the vignette. So I'll bring this thing down quite a bit like so. It's our vignette darkness, which is maybe a bit extreme, but I want it to be obvious. Click on the vignette, get the selection tool so we don't add a point. Like so, and let's apply it so we can see it better. So I'm going to apply this to the outside. Click on mask again to see it. Now it's kind of extreme looking now because it's really bright, relatively speaking, inside, but we're going to darken the inside. The way we do that is by adding another primary layer by clicking this little plus down here, plus P. That's a primary layer like that. And I want to connect that primary layer to the mask down here. I do that with this little button right there that connects this primary layer down to the layer below it in terms of the mask. So now the mask shows up there, a little triangle again, but you haven't told it how you want to apply the mask to this layer. You just have connected it to that mask. You can have a different mask applied to every single layer here if you want to, but in this case we're applying the same mask. But I want to work on the inside, not the outside. So I click on this. We haven't changed this primary layer yet, but we're going to darken it just a bit here because it's a little bit too bright. So let's bring down offset and the gain as well. So now we have this darker area inside with a vignette around the outside. Let me just turn these guys off so I see the 4. I click the bottom one, that affects both because the mask is applied to both. The top one, if I want to make the bottom one a little bit darker, I can pull that down even more to further enhance the vignette there. But you see we can apply the same mask to 2 different layers here and have one be inside and one be outside. So I think you can see that working with masks inside SpeedGrade is a lot easier than working with the track matte key effect inside Premiere Pro. I'm going to show you how to adjust color in SpeedGrade, and we're going to work with color wheels and sliders. But before we open up a project in SpeedGrade, I want to show you how I set up the project in Premiere Pro. So to do that, go to Working Files and go to Premiere Pro Projects and go on down to SG Color. Since I knew that I was going to open up this project in SpeedGrade, I did a few things to set it up for work inside SpeedGrade. First of all, I added adjustment layers above every clip. Now we're not going to work with adjustment layers in SpeedGrade this time, but this is just good practice to get these guys on top like that because they give you more options inside SpeedGrade. Then the next thing I did was that I adjusted tonality for all the clips. So I'll click on this one here and we'll go to Effect Controls. I applied Luma Curve to all of the clips. And that way I've got tonality set up in advance the way I want it to be set up. You do tonality here and then do color inside SpeedGrade. But you don't have to follow that workflow. You can just do all of your work inside SpeedGrade or do most of your work inside Premiere Pro and do some finishing touches in SpeedGrade, whatever you want. But here I set up this effect in advance for 2 reasons. First of all, just to get tonality set up, but also to show you that you need to apply the Lumetri effect if you've added other effects to your clips. So I added the Lumetri effect after I added Luma Curve, and by default it went down below Luma Curve where it belongs. The order that effects are applied are from top to bottom, so Lumetri is applied after Luma Curve. Now I'm going to open up SpeedGrade, and we'll go track down that project. Now right here it's inside my recent project list, but it might not be in yours. So click on Open Project, and go to Premiere Pro Projects and go on down to SG Color. And it asks you which sequence you want. If we came directly from Premiere Pro, it wouldn't do this, but because we're opening the project as opposed to the sequence, it asks you which sequence. In this case, there's only one to choose from, so we click Open. All right, I've set up my analysis tools here to have 2 scopes open. I've got the vector scope open over here and RGB Parade, which is called Parade here inside SpeedGrade. Just change to the 2 scopes layout here by clicking this drop-down list and selecting 2 scopes. Then right-click in here to select the scopes that you want. And right-click here and select Parade. Now the vector scope, as I mentioned before, is not really a very effective scope. Technically, it's actually doing some things that are correct, but in terms of our using it practically, it's not that much use. But I do want to have it open because it does at least give us an idea of which way the colors are going. It kind of confirms what we're going to see over here in the RGB Parade. And then after we make some changes to the colors, we're going to go back over here and change this to the waveform, because when you work with colors inside SpeedGrade, you're also adjusting luma. So you've got to go back to the waveform scope to see what happened and then make some adjustments if necessary. So this first clip, we're just taking a look at it and look at the RGB Parade there, and it's trending pretty heavily toward blue here in the highlights. You look at the vector scope, it's going down here toward blue as well. So you want to compensate for that by bringing down the blue. So we do that right down here in the look area, working with the color wheels. So how do we do this? We kind of look at the scope there, And we see that the reds are going down a little bit. We need to bring the reds up overall. So we start off by going to the offset and start pulling toward red here. And it's a slow process, so I hold on the shift key and that speeds things up. Notice how the greens are kind of shifting around too. So I need to pull it around a little bit to get the blues and the reds and the greens to kind of line up at the bottom there. I'm doing this on the assumption that the overall scene is neutral, which it isn't. Really, the scene is trending toward green anyways because it's a big vineyard. But nevertheless, we're going to try to get things lined up here along the bottom. All right, now that we've worked with offset, we step over to highlights. It looks like the blue highlights need to come down. You can barely see them above the scale there, but the blue highlights are too blue. So I'm going to bring them down. So I go over here to highlights. I pull away from blue to bring the blue highlights down. And again, I hold on the shift key, hold them down, which lifts up the scale, essentially. I want to kind of pull toward green to bring them up a little bit. Try to balance them all that way. That did a pretty good job, I think. Now I'm looking at the scene there. It's kind of bright. Also, it would be nice to make it a little bit warmer. So we can use these guys up here to help us out. There it says temperature, and here it says magenta. They're kind of misleading. It's not really temperature. What it is this is a controller that also works just like highlights. You see blue to orange? It's a straight line from here to there. So I'm going to warm things up by just dragging this little slider to the right a bit, just to kind of warm up the whole scene a bit. And let's check the waveform now to see how we change the luma. Right-click on U, go to waveform, and we see that we're too bright. And we could probably bring down the blacks just a little bit. So that's what happens when you work with color here inside SpeedGrade. You change luma at the same time. I'm going to go down here and just bring down the blacks a little bit by going to offset. Drag it a little bit left like that. I need to go to the highlights and bring them down a bit now. And now if we want to adjust the contrast, we do that by going to shadows and highlights. Go to shadows first. Take the gamma of the shadows and bring them down. Go to highlights. Take the gamma of highlights and bring them up. And that's how you adjust contrast. Let's go to the next clip here. Same basic scene, obviously different color cast. Let's work with the sliders instead. They actually can be pretty intuitive when you look at the RGB parade like this. So I'm going to click over here to this little button there, go over to the sliders, and I wanted to change back to the vector scope here, so right click, go to the vector scope. Should be trending there toward orange as it is now. Pull this thing down a bit here, so I want to unlink everything. So click on each one in turn to unlink all of them. Let's take a look at this. First thing you work with is offset, that's the left-hand side here. The reds are way too high. We want to bring them down. So I hover over the red there, hold on the shift key and start dragging. And that brings the reds down. Notice the greens and the blue do not move. And let's take a look at the blues there. They need to go up a bit, like so. So we've taken care of the base now. We need to take care of the highlights. The red highlights need to come way down. Looks like everything's moving, but that's just the scale changing. We need to bring the blue highlights up. The sliders work with one color at a time, but we still have these guys on top here, so we can warm things up a bit here by clicking on U and sliding you to the right a bit like that. And now we can check the waveform scope to see how the luma's going. Looks like we're okay down there at the low end, and the top end could be a little bit brighter. So we need to fix that, but we need to go back to the color wheels to do that. So click on the color wheels, over here, and drag you to the right just a little bit like so. And I think that worked out reasonably well. Go to the next clip here. We're going to work with the color wheels here. Change back to the vector scope, right click. We're kind of trending down here toward green towards cyan a bit there. And you can see that over here we've got a lot of green, a lot of blue, and not much red. So I want to lift up the red a little bit along the baseline there. So go over here, drag toward red a bit, just to lift up the reds a little bit there. Now I want to work out the highlights. So I want to bring the blues and the greens down. So I'm going to pull away from the blues and the greens here. Lift it straight up like this. That brings down the highlights, effectively lifting up red at the same time. And that, I think, almost fixed everything. Another way to check things out is to look at these little lines down there. I'm seeing that the red is a little bit above the green, which is a little bit above the blue. So it'd be nice to lift up the green shadows. So I'll go over here to shadows, take the midtones of the shadows here for the green, and pull them down to lift them up, basically. And sort of the same thing with blue, so I pull down toward blue a little bit too. That's another way to line things up. Maybe we want to lift up the blue midtones. We can go to midtones and drag toward blue. Now we're assuming that the scene is balanced. It trends toward red here anyways, but that would be the way that you would work with a scene that would be balanced. Let's check the waveform, right click. Looks like we need to bring them down a little bit, so we go back to overall. And we need to slide this to the left a little bit to bring it down just a touch. As far as the highlights go, we need to bring them up quite a bit. Something like that. Going down to the dining room here as well, we'll change over to the sliders by clicking this little button right there. And we'll change to the vector scope by right-clicking here, vector scope. Let it refresh. There we go. We're trending way up toward red, kind of leaning a little bit toward magenta. So we need to bring the reds way down here. So we go down here and everything's unlocked because that's how they were done before. So it picks up the last thing we did. Bring the red offset down. So So drag this to the left a little bit, hold on the shift key. Need to bring the blue and the green offset up, right like that. Now we need to bring the red highlights way down. Looks like we could lift the blue highlights a little bit. Looks like we need to bring the red midtones down a little bit. So go over here. And that is, a way to use this by looking at the RGB parade here, or the parade, and working with the sliders over here. Check the waveform. And I think we're okay at the low end, and looks like we're actually pretty good in both sides there. Move on down to the next clip here. Now in Premiere Pro, we could crop to her face and use the skin tone line in the vector scope. I'll right click over here. The vector scope does not have a skin tone line. So I'll go back to the color wheels. I want to bring the reds way down in the offset here. See how high they are above the bottom? Go over here and bring the reds down on the offsets. I'm kind of moving around here to try to find the best balance here. There we go. Now we need to bring down the red highlights. Pull away from the red there on the highlights. Lifting up the green and the blue at the same time in the process. Something like that. And now it looks a little kind of washed out. We could then drop the midtones overall. We could also warm it up here by taking this little orange slider there and dragging it to the right. And let's check out the waveform by right-clicking here, go to waveform. And I think we could bring it down just a skosh and maybe lift up a little bit, but I think we did a pretty good job there. Go on down to the last clip here. We know this building is supposed to be orange, or a little bit oranger. So we need to figure out which thing we want to move to just affect the building. So the building is probably the bright end of the midtones or the darker end of the highlights. So we'll start with midtones and see what happens here. So I'm going to click on midtones. And I want to take the bright end of the midtones here, the gain. And I want to pull toward orange a little bit. So let's see what happens here. Affecting things that are more mid-tone-ish, whereas the building is probably a little bit brighter. So I'm going to reset that by clicking this little triangle there. Go to highlights instead. I'm going to try the low end of the highlights here. Drag toward orange there and the low end of the highlights. And that is definitely affecting just the building. And there you have it. So not only do you have two full sets of tools to adjust color, that is the color wheels and the sliders, but you also can work inside the overall view, the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Also use the RGB parade as your guide to determine which of these areas you're going to work within as you make your color correction adjustments.